Would you mind giving me a ride? Just whatever you do, don't touch my sloshy trash bag. This world is a strange one. It can be nice to help those in need. Sometimes people find themselves in situations and they're in need of a ride. But beware, not everyone hitching a ride is looking for help. Sometimes they're looking for prey. Enjoy these allegedly true hitchhiker horror stories. If you're a true night watcher, be sure to like and share this video. And if you've got a story, I'm still looking for airplane and airport scary stories. You can submit yours today at deathbyfear.com. Number 1. Dirt Road Hitcher. Submitted by Cheyenne. I was in the 5th grade at the time this happened, so I must have been around 10 years old. My brother is 3 years older than me, so he was in the 8th grade, around 13 years old. I'm 24 now and he's 27, so it's been a long while. Nonetheless, these experiences are still fresh in my mind. I lived on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere, and I was surrounded by trees upon trees, with my grandmother's house being the only neighbor. Though it sounds like an eerie setting, nothing creepy really ever happened in the middle of nowhere. My dad's job used to require him to either work 12 hours in the day or 12 hours at night, depending on the shift schedule for the week. This occurrence happened when he was working nights, so he would be away from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. It was only me, my brother, and my mother at home, and my nearby grandparents were home as well. It was probably around 9 p.m., and the 3 of us were sitting in the living room watching some TV before going to bed. From the living room window, you can see my grandparents' house across the yard, as well as the dirt road behind it. So you can see an approaching car's headlights before you can actually see the car itself. For some reason, at the time, I was just looking out the living room window that night. I can't remember why though. Eventually, I noticed headlights coming down the road. As the car came into view, I noticed that it was slowing down. Before I go on, I must say that I always had a fear of seeing something like this. Not just a car slowing down in front of our houses, but at night, when you can only see the glowing tail and headlights, and nothing more. So, needless to say, I was getting more and more spooked by the second, as the car kept slowing down. I expected my fear to be alleviated when I finally saw the car pass by, only I never saw the car pass by my grandparents. Their headlights just barely managed to shine past the corner of the house, so I could tell that that car had come to a complete stop in front of the house. Anxiously and quickly, I told my brother and mother what I had just seen. They came to the window to witness it themselves. My mom told us not to panic, that it may just be somebody needing directions. Of course, I didn't think about this at the time, but what person or people would drive down a far less traveled dirt road needing directions at this time of night? That's quite a detour just for directions. We all waited at the window in anticipation for what seemed like the longest hours in the history of time. All the while, my imagination was running rampant with possible scenarios that my grandparents may be facing. Finally, the headlights started to grow brighter, and the car came into view past my grandparents' house, and within a few seconds, the car disappeared down the road. Shortly thereafter, our house phone rang. This is before landlines really started to die out. My mother picked up the phone, and it was my grandmother on the other end. She said that some truck had stopped in front of their house, and a shirtless man had knocked on their front door. My grandmother, who had answered the door herself, called my grandfather over to her. They were nice, of course, and asked the man if they could do something for him. The man said that he needed my grandfather to give him a ride to somewhere up the road, which he never specified. This request was very odd, because there was someone visible enough to be seen sitting in the driver's seat of the truck. My grandfather declined, because there was someone with the man, and the man himself was already acting suspicious. There was a spring-triggered screen door separating them from the man, and they were talking to him through that screen part. The moment my grandpa had declined his request, the man apparently became visibly upset and began yelling while beating on the steel part of the screen door. My grandparents closed the second door, the wooden one, in the man's face, and watched him from the window until he got back in his truck and left, screaming curses and death threats all the way. After my mother had gotten off the phone with my grandma, she called my dad and explained the situation to him. Being that he works a good hour and 10 minutes away, and the fact that nobody was really threatened with a weapon, he just told my mom to call the cops and have them check out the woods around our houses to be sure the man and his crony weren't trying to shake us out. We found nothing, but sure enough, when my dad was coming home in the morning, he kept a tired eye out for these strange men. And as he was pulling down our road, he saw a skinny, shirtless man in the bushes near my grandparents' house. He was holding a crowbar. The moment the man saw my dad's vehicle, he smiled a big smile at him and walked oddly calmly back into the woods. It wasn't the crowbar that freaked my dad out. It was the fact that the man had been wearing gloves. Maybe he was looking too much into it, but it was still creepy that that man was out there. Now, we knew a cop that went to the same Baptist church as us at the time, so my mother personally called him. He brought another policeman with him. They drove both of their patrol cars up to the tree lines, then shone their huge spotlights into the woods. My dad's pontoon boat was parked outside at the time, because this was before he had a shed built to put the boat in, so the family friend cop climbed into it to be sure nobody was hiding inside. After he and the other cop had done a thorough sweep of the property, they reported that they had found nothing or no one of suspicion, but they told us not to hesitate to call the moment we heard or saw anything. That's where the meat and potatoes of this story ends. However, the next morning when my mom was taking me and my brother to school, we were driving the opposite way in which the truck had went last night. We hadn't even traveled a mile down the road before we saw something rather disturbing lying on the side of the road. There was a black toboggan, or a beanie, along with a shirt, a pair of pants and shoes, and even socks. Apparently the socks used to be white, but red stains covered them. It gave me chills to see this, and I asked my mom what that was. And panicky, she sped down the road explaining that it was probably just clay that someone had picked up on their shoes and socks. But by the time we were coming home from school the same day, the clothing was gone. For our family, the night before and that morning were the only times we heard or saw anything related to the shirtless man and his buddy. But that's not to say we didn't find out more about these creepy men, because later on we did hear on the news that an elderly man had been flagged down by a shirtless hitchhiker on the road one day, only to be stabbed numerous times and beaten within an inch of his life. The men ran at the sight of other vehicles coming down the road, and luckily the old man survived, but it's strange that these men weren't even trying to steal or take anything. It was like they were looking for people to hurt. It's been 14 or 15 years since that happened, and to this day I'm left wondering what would have happened if my grandfather had agreed to give this shirtless man a lift to God knows where. Number 2. Black-Eyed Child Hitchhiker. Submitted by Vinci Mode. I've never been a believer in the paranormal. Honestly, I've always just kept to myself, played my games, watched my movies, read a few books here and there. I'm quite the boring person, but I'm completely satisfied with that. So, when I experienced this most horrifying moment in my life, I was completely caught off guard. To be frank, I don't think I've ever come so close to dying until this. This is definitely the most I've ever been afraid. Much of my family and I live scattered across rural Nevada. My parents live about 80 miles away from me, in fact, but every other week or so I go out to see them. Mom makes a killer Mexican chicken casserole that I could die for. After one evening of great dinner and catching up with family, I got back in my truck at around 10 o'clock at night, and I began my long drive home. To help me stay awake and pass the time, I turned on a classic rock station. It was a dark night too. If I recall correctly, it was a new moon night, so it was especially dark. Now, this drive takes me down long, straight roads in the middle of nowhere. It can be creepy or boring, but never both. About 40 minutes into the drive, which is a little over halfway home, I almost didn't see what appeared to be a 12 or 13-year-old child. Sticking his hand out from the side of the road, he appeared to need a ride. The moment I really saw him, it gave me a good scare, and immediately I was burning rubber coming to a quick halt. I calmed myself down and put the gear into park. I couldn't help but wonder though, what is this kid doing all the way out here? We were miles away from the city. Maybe he really did need help. But suddenly, my whole body seemed to seize up, telling me not to move. My hand was already on the door handle, but I couldn't even force myself to continue to pull it open. I had completely froze. The thing was, I'd been driving with my window down about halfway. It was a cool night after all. So while I sat there unmoving and afraid for seemingly no reason, I suddenly heard a voice just beyond my door.
"Can I climb inside your truck?"
The voice came from the boy. He was now standing just outside, and his voice didn't sound right. He sounded both old and young at the same time. My fear was only growing inside me each passing moment. I stared at the child, unable to reply. Besides, that was a very weird way to ask for a ride. He continued,
"Don't worry, it won't take very long."
I stared into his eyes. It may have just been how dark it was outside, but I swear I couldn't see the whites of his eyes. I couldn't see any color in them at all. They seemed to only be black. I gathered my courage and I reached over to roll up my window, and still with a straight face, the child spoke.
"It will be over before you know it."
Somehow his voice had changed. It was deeper now. He didn't flinch as I began to roll up the window, and the moment that window sealed into place, I punched it into drive and sped off, and as I sped away, I looked into my rearview mirror. I should have seen that kid behind me, but as I looked back, he was completely gone. I drove twice the speed limit home, and when I got home, I locked all my doors. I don't know what happened that night, but honestly, I've never been more afraid in my life. Number 3. Hoof Lady. Submitted by Hin Hal. I live in Canada, and I grew up being told a truly horrifying story about the Hoof Lady. The thing is, I always thought it was just that, a scary story. But as I grew into an adult, I've learned that people have sighted this woman many times before. In fact, many truckers have seen the Hoof Lady on multiple occasions, and never do they stop to pick her up. Once I began to hear the true stories about the Hoof Lady, I began to get even more scared about her existence. But at the very least, I can share with you the story that I always heard. Knowing what I know now, it might be true. Several years ago, there was a group of 3 men. They would take advantage of hitchhikers. Anyone needing a ride, they would pick up and kidnap and do awful things to them. In their time, they killed many people. One night, as they were looking for another unsuspecting victim, they happened upon a young woman walking alone at night. As the 3 silently agreed that this was perfect prey, they pulled the vehicle over onto the side of the road, rolled down the window, and asked the lady if she needed a ride. The very attractive young woman looked at them and gave them a sinister look, saying, "Why, that's very sweet of you." The man in the driver's seat looked over to the one in the passenger seat, saying, "Let her in politely." So he gave up his seat, letting the woman in, and then he sat in the back. They continued their drive, the three of them passing glances at the attractive woman. The eager men tried to spark up conversation with her. "So, what do you do around here?" one of them asked. She didn't reply. Another man inquired, "You live around these parts?" And still, she ignored their questions. The men grew impatient, and during an awkward moment of silence, the woman suddenly began to laugh, and then she said,
"I know what you did today. I know what you've been doing around here."
Her voice didn't match her body, and as the men stared at her in fear and disbelief, one of them noticed that her feet weren't feet, because her legs ended in hooves. The driver, nervous and completely afraid, stopped the car, but before he slowed down completely, the woman shifted in her seat and pressed her hoof onto the gas pedal. The driver's foot was crushed, and he screamed in pain, and the woman steered the car into one of the nearby trees. The next day, the police found the remains of this car and the remains of what used to be people inside it. Two of the bodies seemed to have been crushed to death, but not by the impact of the car. They seemed to have been stomped on repeatedly until they were mush. The police were baffled as to what could do that. The third man, the one they found with a crushed foot, barely conscious in the driver's seat, was mumbling and beginning to wake up. Though bloody and battered, he matched the description of one of the Hitchhiker killers. Later on at the hospital, he would tell him the story of what happened to his friends. Of course, they thought he was just crazy. Or maybe he was pretending to be psychotic so he didn't have to rot in prison. That's how the story goes. People say that the driver is still in a mental hospital, scarred permanently from what he witnessed. I can't say I blame him. He may have been the worst kind of person, but I think anyone would lose their minds if they were forced to watch the Hoof Lady stomp their friends to death. Number 4. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. Submitted by Neko. We were at Hawaii and driving to head to a local spot that my dad and his family used to visit when they were young. When we found the place, we had our fun, and then we decided to head back to the car once the sun started to set. Nothing unusual really happened until we began to head back to the house. Along the side of the road, we saw a woman. She had long brown hair, blue eyes, a white shirt with a brown pair of shorts, and she was walking barefoot. When she saw us coming up, she did the signature "I need a ride" sign, and we decided to be nice and pull over. My mom kindly asked the woman where she was headed. The woman replied, "To a local beach area. I'm going to collect some seashells for a present I'm going to make." The woman sounded nice and innocent, so my mom nodded and motioned for me to open the door for her. I did, and the lady climbed inside. She told us the directions to the beach, and it just so happened to be the one we just came from, so it was pretty convenient. We turned around and made our way back to that beach. Now, I was a shy kid, so I tried to avoid making eye contact with the woman. So instead, I focused my attention out the car window. Somewhere along the way during the ride, we hit something on the ground, and it gave the car a good shake. I looked to the lady to instinctually ask if she was okay, but when I turned toward her seat, where she had just been sitting, she was no longer there. I yell out to my mom, and they pull the car over. Then she heads out of the car to look around. We waited nervously. She then walked back to the car and said, "There's no way she just up and left like that." We hadn't even heard her open the door, and surely if she had, she would have hurt herself. Worried about her well-being, my family decided to go to the police and ask if anyone has seen the lady, and to at least tell them what had just happened. We had no leads, so we just prayed that she was alright, and we decided to head home, though we were all a bit anxious and a little bit confused. When we got to the house, in the doorway, we saw 2 seashell necklaces lying there waiting for us. Necklaces we never owned. In fact, when we picked them up and looked at them, the shells on the necklaces were still wet, as if they had just freshly been taken out of the water. It sent chills down my spine. My mom told us that next time I go to my dad's house, to take the necklaces to my grandparents, since they know more about Hawaii than I do. When I finally got to visit them, I explained to them the story, and I showed them those necklaces. Their eyes immediately widened, and my grandpa told me of his own experience with the Vanishing Hitchhiker. He explained that in Hawaii, one of the gods named Pele travels the roads in disguise and rewards kind travelers for helping her. When I asked what happened if someone doesn't help Pele, he didn't answer. He just flat out ignored me. So I sometimes wonder what would have happened if we didn't decide to help her. Or what if we missed her altogether? Would we even still be here? Or would we all have met a terrible fate? And number 5, Hitchhiking with the Paranormal. Submitted by Drew. I was 17, and my whole world had fallen apart in the past 2 years. Without going too much into detail, I had nothing I could count on other than hopefully my best friend. So I started walking with nothing but the clothes on my back, my beloved black jean jacket, my folding knife, and my backpack, stuffed with some clothes and a few pictures. I had to escape. I had to just get away. Mind you, this was the early 90s, so hardly anyone had those big cell phones. I had grown up in an extremely rural area in New England and was headed toward a small city within my state where my best friend Emma lived. It was about 60 miles from my hometown to get to my best friend, and the area is very mountainous as well. I was a runaway. I left basically in the dead of night. Looking back on it, I was an idiot. I don't remember the exact time I left, but it was dead quiet out. Even most of the animals must have been asleep. I'd been walking probably an hour when I finally got the hint that this was not going to be a normal night. As I walked, there were no streetlights and sparse house lights, and even those were a far cry from the road. Up ahead to my left, I heard movement. It sounded small and light, but when I looked, it was not something small or light at all. What I saw was the largest black wolf or dog I've ever seen. It wasn't just black though. It was almost void of color, like blacker than black. Its eyes were red, and not a reddish brown or something like that, but unnaturally, unearthly red. It was horrifying. I froze right there. I hadn't heard at the time of black dogs, but I had heard of hellhounds and knew that no wolves had been in this area for many decades. As I looked at this creature, something weird happened because I suddenly felt happy. I felt calm and warm, and then as suddenly as it appeared, the wolf was gone. I blinked and it was no longer there, and there was no sound of it leaving. It was just vanished. I shook myself out of the stupor it had put me in, and I began walking again. I was more determined now and positive as I walked, sure that things would really work out. Another hour or so passed of walking. I was at a point in the road where on the left was a lake, and on the right were hills and semi-thick forest. Once again, the silence was broken by noise. This time it sounded big, very big. The sound came from my right. When I looked, it was too dark to see anything, but I heard a large animal breathing. I heard an exhale, the kind of exhale when something is testing the air for a sense. Once again, dread and fear filled me. I knew these woods. I knew there were black bears and moose both living in there. The sounds made me think it was maybe a moose, which was actually scarier. There's plenty of games and berries in the woods, so a bear was much less likely to attack than a pissed off moose was. I started walking a bit sideways so I could watch the woods, even though it was too dark to see much. Suddenly the sounds came closer, but then there was a big crashing sound like something large was barreling through. I didn't stop. I thought I heard another growl coming, but suddenly there was a 16-wheeler coming my way. It had its brights on, and it blinded me for a moment. Luckily, the driver saw me and came to a quick stop. I opened the door to see a very odd man in the driver's seat. He was about medium-sized, but his ears were huge, with earlobes that looked the size of quarters. He had a baseball cap on, which covered most of his steel gray hair, which looked to be very thick. His eyes, though, they were the strangest eyes I've ever seen on a person. They were silver, not light blue, but actually silver. His hands, both still on the steering wheel, were gnarled, as if he'd worked with them most of his life. But when he spoke, his voice and words seemed too young for his body, if that makes sense. He asked me where I was going, and I told him. He offered to take me the whole way, as he was going one town further south and it wouldn't be any problem. His words and smiles seemed so caring and warm-hearted, but I wasn't stupid. People can seem however they want, as long as they get what they want. I did accept the ride though. I was getting tired. I did, however, open the knife in my coat pocket and kept it open just in case. As he pulled away from the shoulder, I remembered the sounds I'd heard and looked to my right. The light from the headlights illuminated the forest, and there I saw a bull moose lying on the ground, only about 5 yards away from where I'd been standing. But it was dead. Its throat had been ripped out, blood still flowing from the wound on the ground. The driver looked over and said, "And they say there's no wolves out here." I didn't reply. As we drove, he had some light music on. I don't remember what it was, but it was all instrumental. The driver told me how foolish I was, that pretty girls hitchhiking is too dangerous. I explained as much as I could of my situation, to which he told me to never tell a stranger that much. The ride seemed fairly mundane, as we drove through another small town, but once we had passed through, another weird thing happened. The area was forest on both sides. I believe this part was part of a state park. Suddenly, there was fog all around us. It was thick and rolling, and was especially odd since we had just come up from a valley that had no fog. The driver sighed and said something along the lines of, "What is this?" He slowed down and drove very carefully for about 5 or 10 minutes before I saw something on the right side of the road. And it was the same black wolf I had seen before. I turned to the driver to point it out to him, to know that someone else had seen it, but he was already staring at it, and he just nodded. Seconds after his nod, the fog began to sort of float away. I tried to talk, but the driver hushed me. "You're pretty dang lucky. Now hush and keep an eye out." Another half-hour later or so, we came to a train crossing with the train's last few cars passing. The thing is, the train crossing lights and those little bars that come down weren't working. If the fog hadn't been there to slow us down, we may have been crossing that spot at the same time the train had come through. Finally, we were right outside of the city I was going. I could see the city lights, and I started to get excited. I hadn't seen Emma in a year, and I'd missed her so much. My mind began to wander, thinking of our reunion when the truck stopped at a red light. Suddenly, I had the urge to look out my window, and for the final time that night, I saw the red-eyed wolf again. This time, it seemed to be smiling at me, before letting out a howl that was so loud I could hear it clearly over the truck's engine. The driver laughed, the kind of laugh you have when you remember something funny that happened a long time ago. The light turned green, and the wolf trotted off the other way as we began to move. We soon arrived at Emma's apartment building, shortly after that. And as I thanked the driver, he smirked at me, but not in a mean or foreboding way. He said, "Remember to watch yourself out there, and always be ready to defend yourself." Keeping that knife open was already a good start. He winked at me, then shooed me out of the truck. I don't know how he knew I had that knife, or that it was even open. My pockets were deep and I never took it out. Better yet, the pocket that it was in faced the door, not him. I went to his apartment and had a wonderful tear-filled reunion, but it was late and we were both exhausted. We both went to bed. In the morning, I told her the whole story, which she laughed at and said I was making up. That is, until I told her the truck driver dropped me off in front of her building. That's impossible. The clearance at the entrance is only 8 feet. A tractor trailer wouldn't even fit. I followed the path the truck had taken and found that she was right. It couldn't have gotten into the entrance of the complex. On my way back, I then found a very large paw print next to the road, which just confused me more. It scared me just as much as well. I don't know why any of this happened, or what it meant, but I have seen that wolf-like creature a few times since, and I still have no explanation for any of it. I don't know whether to be scared, or just plain confused. Not everyone can be trusted. Most of us know better than to trust a stranger at face value. Sometimes it's just safer and easier to ignore those beckoning for a ride at the side of the road. But you never know. Ignoring those hitchhikers might save your life. But what if they truly are in need? What if they are seconds away from a psychopath bursting through the trees behind them to finish them off? Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to send us your airplane and airport scary story soon at deathbyfear.com. Thanks.